Converted Man here, and I've got Sergeant Skeptic.
Thank you very much.
Yeah! All right, Sergeant Skeptic. You told me to call you a girl's name. Very confused by that. Don't know what's going on there. So why don't we start there? What do you want us to call you here?
Yeah, well, but my first name is totally fine, Dana, and it is a little effeminate. And I used to get teased as a kid, oh, you got a girl's name, but now I kind of like it. It's a little
Yeah,
unique
hey,
and a
yeah,
little
it's
different.
unique. Do you know its meaning, or does it have any sort of special meaning to you, or
Yeah,
origin?
well, as far as my mother has told me that I was named after a movie actor from the 40s by the name of Dana Andrews. And so that's where my name originated. And my parents never thought that it might be a girl's name. I think they decided on the name before I was born. So yeah, I don't really know the whole backstory, but my understanding is I was named after this actor, Dana Andrews. And I used to
Yeah.
not like my name, but now I do like my name.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. It's like if you try to think, what would I want my name to be, and you're like, well, I'm just used to the one I have. So
Right, right.
okay. So now, speaking of your younger years, let's start there because I like to cover religious upbringing if you had any.
Yeah.
Uh, did you were you raised in any particular religion? What were your parents' religions or guardian religions? Can you lay that out for us?
Yeah, sure. So I was born in California, but then my parents moved to Massachusetts for when I was like age 2 to about 6. And my parents divorced in Massachusetts when I was about second grade. And my mom moved back to California because she had lived her whole life in California. So I grew up in a home with an older sister and a single mom. And between the ages of, let's say, like 6 years old and 50 years old, I might have seen my dad maybe 50 to 100 times. So I was raised a latchkey kid in a completely non religious home. I don't remember even having a single conversation about God or religion, um, until I was well into adulthood. So I don't know, I could think of just a completely clean slate. When I was a teenager, maybe 17, 18 years old, some of my friends became born again Christians. And my only understanding of Christianity at that point was that you had to believe in Jesus and that you could not have sex before you were married. And that was the
Yeah.
complete, total understanding that I had of religion of any kind, by the time I was 17. So I did become a senior soldier in the Salvation Army, and I was a senior soldier for about maybe 10 years. And that all occurred through marriage and fatherhood, and then when me and my wife were boyfriend and girlfriend and then newlyweds, she had been raised in the Salvation Army, but she kind of left that church. Well, as soon as we had children, she went back to church and kind of asked me, hey, I'd like you to go to church as well. I think this would be a good way to raise the kids. So I did. And my experience was that I actually really liked the Salvation Army. I did not have a negative experience at all. I liked the people. I kind of liked the social work that they did. But I had no concept of Christianity at all. So becoming a senior soldier, you had to take some classes that I took. And that was where I first started to learn about the ministry of Jesus. And I did eventually accept Christ as a personal savior, as a member of the Salvation Army. But I was always skeptical. I kind of did this for family reasons and fatherhood reasons. I did think it was the right thing to do. But as far as being a real believer in Christ, I was always skeptical. I wanted to believe it's true. Um, so kind of fast forwarding, I was a police officer, then a police detective. I was in charge of the detective unit at one time in my career. And so I was very busy, did not really have time, and did not prioritize really studying, Christianity or whether it was true. It was always something in my mind, like I'm not sure about, Jesus raising from the dead or me needing a savior. And I didn't really know anything about it. But when my kids grew up and moved out of the house, and I retired in 2015, all of a sudden, wow, when your kids move out, you got a lot of extra time on your hands and you got to fill it. So then I really started getting into, researching Christianity, and I wanted to know, is this true? And I ultimately determined that it was not true. Um, I don't really believe necessarily that Christianity is a bad thing, or that Christian people are, bad people. I don't believe that at all. I kind of identify with the lifestyle and the values, but I don't think it's true. And I think that probably atheism is true, that there is no God. That's what I think is probably the most likely true. But I could potentially be wrong about that as well. So that's
Right.
kind of my story.
Wow.
I was probably about 27, 28 years old when I really became a senior soldier in the Salvation Army. And I was well into my 40s when I started kind of researching whether Christianity was true. And I'm 61 now. So I've been doing
So
that, but I do really enjoy talking about religion. I enjoy talking about and studying the New Testament. I find it fascinating.
it's
Yeah.
about 20 years of religious experience of indoctrination or understanding, if you will. Would that be about right then?
Yeah, I would balk at the word indoctrination though, because I was
Right,
an
right,
adult.
yeah. Well,
Yeah, I
right.
mean, I
You
was
kind of came to it. You weren't indoctrinated as a child. Well, I would guess that as an adult, it is. I mean, you're surrounded by people that believe in one singular idea. So I kind of consider that as a version of indoctrination, although maybe technically not correct. Uh, so
yeah.
yeah, when you first, it's interesting how you come off the blank slate that many people say, oh no, no, we all know God's in your heart and all this. And
Yeah.
so growing up, did you ever have any notion or idea, a question of how are we here, why are we here, looking to the sky, or anything of that nature that you, looking back now, you could go, oh well, there, yes, I thought about God even though I didn't know it was God, or so, anything of that nature at all?
Yeah, not really. It was not a priority ever for me to think, what am I doing here? I'm not saying I never had a thought like that. And certainly as a teenager, that was the first time somebody told me about Jesus, was my fellow teenagers, but they were just coming into this faith too. So everybody was very naive and not really able to, have in-depth conversations about it. But no, I
Right.
mean, I grew up a Southern California surfer. That was my priority in life, man. I was
Tubular, man,
yeah, I
tubular.
mean,
Dude.
my high school education was a complete debacle. It was just a mess. And I just hung out with my buddies on the beach and we surfed all day. That was the main priority in my life. So I really didn't think too much about religion or God or anything,
Yeah.
until I was, a police officer and married. And then I did start to think about it. Yes.
Right. So, but did you ever run up against the concept, because it's such in the zeitgeist of America that it's like, if, well, maybe more in the South, that I'm in the South, that it's like, you can't, if you throw a rock you'll hit a church kind of thing.
Yeah.
South
Yeah.
California, not, is more, very more secular. It's very, I mean, there are churches, but they're kind of spread out. So you must have been aware at some level, but it just wasn't like, it was like, yeah, whatever, it's a building, you just, it was a nice pretty building. You didn't even give a first thought, let alone a second thought to it. It seems to me, which does kind of go against the idea that we all have this, that religion sometimes will say that everyone knows that there is a God, and it seems like you're a counter example to that. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say that probably if somebody had asked me, do you believe in God? I probably would have answered more with a positive, like, yeah, probably. I was just a person who just literally didn't really think about it.
Yeah.
And wasn't asked. I was aware that some of my friends. So I grew up in Rossmore, California, and if you know anything about Rossmore, California, it's the bastion of American Catholicism and whiteness. I mean, it's just as Catholic and white as you can get, and quite wealthy.
One of the
Um,
streets is named mayonnaise on bread. That's how
yeah,
white it
right. Yeah, right,
is.
right, right. And so, I was aware that a lot of my friends were Catholic, and they went to. There's a Catholic school there, St. Hedwig's. A lot of my friends actually went to Catholic school,
Mm,
and I know they were taking catechism classes as like 11, 12-year olds or something, and they referred to it
yeah.
as kiddie prison. And so, but I didn't even know what. If you would have said what's Catholicism, I wouldn't have had any clue at all. I am
Yeah.
somewhat aware though that I was baptized Catholic
Hmm.
when I was born. My father's Irish, and was raised in a Catholic environment. And you just, when a child was born, you just baptized them Catholic. This is what you did.
Right. It's more
Um,
of a social thing.
he is kind of a social
Thing.
expectation more than anything
Yeah.
else.
Um,
And my mother has told me they had a Catholic wedding when they got married, and she was planning on, following the teachings of the church. And, I would have, if my father was a nicer guy, I would have probably had a whole bunch of brothers and sisters. But within a very short period of time, my mom was like, I'm out of here. And that was the last I never heard anything about Catholicism at all. I'm just aware when I was baptized Catholic.
right, right. So it's not like because when you hear about the idea of God, like that first time when you were, a teenager, your friends are coming up and they're talking about Jesus, and it's not completely a foreign word that you've never heard of, but it's still an odd. uh, What did you make of it? I mean, you've heard of it, but it's kind of like been, you know, out there. So
Yeah.
what, like,
So
it's like, what are you talking about?
I
Did
think
you
maybe your
feel,
computer.
huh? Uh oh.
Oh, there you go. We had a little glitch there for a second.
Glitched in the Matrix. God is messing with us.
Yeah.
uh,
Right. Right. Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah, or the Satan or whatever. But yeah, so it wasn't a complete foreign concept, God. But when your friends came up to you that first time and started talking about it, it's like, what did you make of that? It's like, was it like mystical, magical? What are they talking about, or what did you feel about that?
Yeah, so I mean, you can't grow up in America and never have heard of Jesus. But I just never really thought about it though. It'd be a little bit, like I had heard of Jesus, but I really didn't know very much. That I knew that you had to believe in Jesus. That was my understanding of it.
Mm.
And
But
I
you didn't
really
know
didn't
why you had to believe in this.
have,
It's not, yeah.
yeah, because you were like, maybe I had some idea that humans were bad and Jesus made them good, kind of a thing, but really no real understanding of it. I had an understanding if you believed in Jesus, you would go to heaven. And if you did not believe in Jesus, you would go to hell. Heaven's a nice place to be. Hell is a bad place to be. So, I mean, we're talking a really, really naive and ignorant concept of Christianity. Until I got into the Salvation Army, I was
Yeah.
really, you know, and my friends were, some of them were Catholic, but the only reason I know that is they went to Catholic school
Hmm.
and they attended catechism classes, but they never taled about it other than, oh, I got to go to kiddie prison today.
Yeah, yeah. It's
They were bummed out about that. So it didn't seem, it didn't have any real importance to me. What was important to me was, hey, we're getting up tomorrow morning early and we're riding our bikes to the beach and we're going surfing. That was very important. That
right.
was very important.
So now, of course, the Salvation Army. I think many people would associate that with the store because
Yeah,
the Salvation Army store, but
right.
it's actually a church
It
as
is a
well,
church. Yeah.
and so the store is kind of like its own. I don't know how connected the two are, uh, and it's a subset of a denomination of Christianity. I don't know if its teachings are I think they're pretty much the same, but they do have a specific mission of trying to help out, impoverished people by selling, stuff in their stores.
Right.
What can you talk on any of those things? Like, did you ever deal with any of the store stuff, or
Yeah.
was it just going to church, or what was that all about?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people don't realize that the Salvation Army is actually a church. It was founded by William Booth, who was, I believe, English, definitely British in Great Britain. And I want to say 1821 that the church was founded, and his mission was to spread the gospel and help humanity. And kind of it sort of evolved into really helping people with substance abuse and alcohol problems. The stores are how they finance all of their alcohol rehabilitation centers and all of their, kind of philanthropic work that they do is through donations and then their Salvation Army stores. And they also get, like all churches, they get donations. And I am aware sometimes they get multi-million dollar donations. And there's a whole system of managing that. As far as my family's involvement with the Salvation Army, it was 90% going to church on Sunday. And it was a very um, kind of traditional Christian church where Jesus died for people's sins, and the belief and a personal relationship with Jesus would wash you clean of those sins and gain you access to heaven. And that was how they promoted the church. There wasn't a lot of talk about hell or anything like that. It was more of a little bit of a positive thing. They have the Salvation Army band, so this is a brass band that plays, and some of the musicians are quite talented.
I've heard them; they are fantastic.
Yeah,
Really talented.
my wife has marched in the Rose Parade
Yes,
multiple times, and people wear a uniform. I never wore a uniform as a member of the Salvation Army. I could have, but I chose not to. It's not mandatory you wear the uniform. It's kind of an outward expression, and I was not a little bit skeptical. I was skeptical and didn't want to, announce that I'm really a senior soldier, but I was.
right.
But we
And
did
they
volunteer.
ring the bell thing, or did they do that at that time, or
Yeah,
because that kind of
usually
came? I think
yeah.
that fell
So
out of favor in the '80s and '90s when I was. I mean, I remember it vaguely, but yeah,
Yeah, so they still have the bell ringers. A lot of those are men who are in the alcohol recovery
mm,
programs and stuff, or they're volunteers. The Salvation Army runs a homeless shelter, and we would volunteer at that. You had to, at 4 o'clock, somebody had to show up to check everybody in, because you had to register, and you registered every day. And so we would volunteer to do that. Check if it's a couple hours of volunteer work, not difficult at all. So me and my wife did that. But mostly it was for us, it was going to church, participating in the kids programs, the fellowship after church. There's a barbecue or a lunch or just hanging out, playing basketball. Those basic kind of church things was really my experience there.
yeah. I mean, it's all very positive for community, and I've been to those stores, and I remember getting like cheap Atari games there, and other little toys or whatever. Sometimes we would get some clothes or whatever, and or furniture every now and again, and we would sometimes just donate whatever to the stores. So that was my only real knowledge of it, and of course the bell ringers. I remember the somebody ringing a bell, and there's a
Yeah.
red little pot there or whatever, um and yeah, I mean, but it is something that you can't really. There's not a lot to object to because it sounds like they had a positive message, and a positive influence on the community in general, and in your life as somebody that we need a community, and especially when you have a family that's you want your kids to be around other kids and trustable adults, and um, so all this is extraordinarily positive things that we secular ish people we need to come up with something that can duplicate it. And there are now, of course, a few atheist churches, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, I've never been to one, but it seems like there might be a real need for something like that, because we can't just tell people, well, don't believe in God without giving them, you know, some way to replace the religious aspects without the negative trappings of indoctrination, or telling people that there's a man in the sky or whatever. But
Yeah.
regardless, that aside, so then you were also a police officer, and then you became a sergeant. And I don't know how the ranking structure works.
Uh-huh.
So how did you start off? You were in police academy. I've seen all those movies. I know what that's about. Totally sure it's completely accurate. That's all I really know of the police,
Yeah.
and my few interactions with police. Do you start as a beat cop? What is what's your trajectory there? How does that go?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, kind of like you were talking about, did I ever think about God? And really, no. But I did think about, hey, what am I going to do with my life? I'm this latchkey kid. I got to take care of myself. There's no fallback thing that's going to take care of me. So I did think, what's my future going to look like? And my story is kind of weird, but I was a surfer. I surfed the Huntington Beach Pier every morning, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if you're familiar with that area, back in when this is like the late 1970s, early 1980s, maybe even mid 1970s when I started surfing. But I'd look up on the pier in the morning is the best time to go surfing in Southern California because the wind conditions are right and it's the best time of day.
Mm.
And the cops would be on the Huntington Beach Pier. They'd drive their police cars out on the Huntington Beach Pier. So I'm sitting there freezing in the water, trying to catch some waves. And I'm looking up at these cops sitting there having their morning coffee. And I'm thinking that was my first little kind of like, wow, I'm like this 14, 15-year-old kid. And I'm like, I got to do something with my life here. What about that? Those guys they're going to, they could surf all the time. That might be a job that I might consider. And then
Beach
there was
patrol, yeah.
yeah. So that was the first little thing in my mind that, hey, maybe police work. And then I always liked the show Adam 12, the original with Reed and Malloy. I liked that show. And I put those two things together and go, I could do that. And so that's what started it. I went through so I started applying as a police officer right when I turned 20. As soon as they would accept my application, and I got told by everybody, you are totally not ready for this job. You're not mature enough. You're going to need to go out and accomplish a few things in your life.
Mm.
And those police managers making those decisions were 100% correct on that. And so I joined the California Army National Guard. Spent 6 years in the National Guard, and when I was in basic training with the Army, I saved up all my money. And when I got out of, when you join the National Guard, you get trained by the United States Army. So when I got out, I made a deal with my dad. Hey, you let me move into your house. He'd moved back. He lived in Europe the whole time I was growing up, but he moved back to California. So I made him a deal. You let me live in your house. I'll pay you rent and everything, but you put it on credit. And I'm going to the police academy. So I went in 1985 into the police academy, self-sponsored with no job, nothing, and got hired very quickly. I just got out of basic training in the Army. I was in great shape. I had my act really together at that particular point. And I got hired right away when I was in the academy. So I graduated in 1985, worked 30 years full time. You start out as a beat cop, a patrol officer when you get out of the academy. Back in the late 80s, there was something called the DARE program, Drug Abuse and Resistance Education. So
Oh yeah, I remember that.
I spent a couple of years. I think I worked patrol my first 3 years of my career. And then I was a DARE officer for 2 years of my career after that. And I really enjoyed that program, but they did away with the program. So I went back to patrol, worked patrol for quite some time. And then I became a detective. I investigated crimes against children as a detective.
Wow.
And I worked for a smaller Southern California police department. So every 5 years, you had to rotate back and work patrol. So I went back to patrol. And I became the personnel officer for a very short period of time, got promoted to sergeant, when you get promoted, so you're a frontline supervisor at that point, well, you're going to go back to working patrol because, that's where all the rookie sergeants go. So I worked patrol as a sergeant, and then it's not really a promotion. It's more of like a lateral transfer, a new job assignment, but they put me as the frontline supervisor in charge of our detective unit, which was small. We had 5 detectives and 2 civilian investigators and some administrative staff. So we're not talking a big, huge, monstrous detective unit, but we were responsible for investigating all crimes that were not gang or drug related. We had another unit for that. So murder, robbery, rape, we investigated all that. I worked in a city that did not have a lot of violent crime. It was a pretty nice place to work. So we might have, 2 or 3 murders a year, and, but we were a small group of people to handle whatever major crimes we had. So yeah, and then I retired in 2015, and, kind of doing odd jobs and private investigative work, since 2015. And, yeah, I kind of thought, hey, I guess my interest in researching Christianity, I started to think, okay, I know a little bit about this. And I call them the celebrity apologists, are not being completely truthful here. I don't think they are. And that bothered me. It's like you're selling this religion and you're not giving people the whole story. You're giving people the story you want them to hear. And that bothers me. And so I had something to say, and on YouTube was a vehicle for saying that. And so that's how my channel kind of got started.
Yeah, I was gonna get into that. I'm just very interested in the police work because
Yeah.
it's something that you encounter police officers, just getting pulled over.
Yeah.
You see videos on YouTube, but you don't really get to know the inside of that or
Yeah.
whatever. It's but yeah, I mean, you're exposed to a dangerous element of reality. There's guns involved, and and crime, and you could get very jaded doing that, and
Yeah.
it doesn't appear to me that you are jaded by it, or I'm sure that some of it affected you at some level, but it seems
Sure.
that you came away in the end okay from all that. Was during that time you were also part of the church, so did the belief in God kind of make you feel a little bit safer on the streets or anything of that, like you pray before you would go on patrol or things of that nature, or was
Mm.
it more in the background of this is something I do on Sunday? How active
Yeah.
in that were you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I didn't anticipate it. No, I did have a belief in God as a member of the Salvation Army, and I wanted to believe that Jesus was divine and a savior, and I did kind of like move in that direction. I was just always skeptical about it, though. Like, I'm not sure about this. It sounds pretty far fetched to me. But as far as prayer before work, no. Now, if you talk to my wife, she will tell you, oh no, 30 years in law enforcement, that has totally changed him. He is a different person because of that. Um, and she knows me better than any other human being on earth. So, but I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not suicidal, and some law enforcement officers, they go down that road, and I did not go down that road. I get up every morning, I make my bed, and I'm like, okay, cool. Let's do something here. So I feel really good about that. I still have my health. I mean, I got some aches and pains at 61 years old, but I can still go surfing. The only time, it's kind of interesting you asked, is when I prayed. The only time I would pray for safety, that I would have a fun and safe surf session every time that I would paddle out to go surfing. That was the one time I did in fact pray, and I would thank Jesus for providing, the beach and the waves and the sunrise or the sunset, depending on that, and my health to be able to even participate in something that I really like doing, and it's a lot of fun for me. So that would be the time I prayed. At work, not so much. No, I think I was very pragmatic about my job as a police officer. Like, somebody's got to do this. It's not always easy. but I like doing it. And, I'd like to think that I did a good job.
Yeah, so
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 I,
the shield of your badge was a supplement for the shield of God, if you will.
yeah, yeah, there's pride in the
Perhaps.
badge. Yeah, the badge is a symbol.
Yeah,
This sort of
yeah.
bothers me. I've been taking sniper shots at J. Warner Wallace,
Right.
and
Yeah,
I
he's
think he
got
deserves it. And I don't want to be too critical about this because I used my badge in a thumbnail, so I'm doing it too, right? I
right.
do
Well,
that.
yeah, there's a symbol of what a badge is. It's kind of like it is kind of like a shield, but a shrunken shield, if you will.
Yeah,
And so you see that, and it's like it's authority. It's something that's like, okay, it would call it, it's a shield, a badge, and it's a badge of honor. It's something that you had to earn and do something to get, and
yeah.
something of value, and to be respected, like they say that, in the military that I was in once upon a time, a couple weeks ago when I was 18, right?
Oh, you
you
were in
know that
what branch?
Navy, very
Okay.
briefly. Yeah, when I was, yeah, 2 weeks ago I was 18 then. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, so
Right.
yeah, a little bit more than 2 weeks ago. A few years. But at any rate, you respect the rank and not necessarily the person. You respect the
Yes.
position,
Right.
like the presidential position is what you're respecting and not the person. And that was still ingrained in me. There was some sort of stupid, I felt it was stupid protest that these college or high school students had walked away during their graduation because the vice president come, and it was Trump's vice president or whatever, and they didn't like Trump. And I'm like, dude, you
Uh-huh.
guys are getting a huge honor by having the vice president there.
Yeah.
The position of that is meaningful, and this is something meaningful that you're skipping out on because you don't like the person. It's like I processed it this whole different way because of what you're trained in the military and how you learn to think about things. So I think that I don't know that there's anything necessarily wrong with using the symbols. I got a little bit symbolic there with the poetry of the you have the shield of God, the armor of God, and then you have the real armor of a bulletproof vest, or the symbols of a police officer. They look a certain way, they stand a certain way, they have the uniform, they have the car, and and that is in a sense protecting them in a way, because it's projecting an aura of power and prestige that and people know that they have legitimate power. And so some people of course will see that as a target. It makes you a target, but it also makes you a deterrent.
Yeah.
It's multifaceted, and it's interesting the interaction of the spiritual religious aspects that play into that, because you have the cross and you have the Bible, and you have all these, of course you could have the priest that might have a certain outfit that they wear to project levels of power as well. They play on these psychological elements that we humans have. Um, and so it's interesting that the spiritual side of that didn't, like, because maybe you were always kind of skeptical about it, that you know you didn't look at it like, I don't need to worry about getting shot because God's got my back or anything like that. It seemed
Yeah.
like, I mean, if you did, I don't know if you did, maybe you didn't, did you worry about anything like that, or did that ever, I don't know if you want to get into anything like that, but I mean, was that a concern that you would, find yourself in that sort of situation, or was
Yeah,
it more,
okay, so good thing. I never really. I always understood, that yes, I could be going to work today and I could die at work, maybe in a traffic accident. Police officers actually get killed by getting run over by a car at a
yeah,
traffic
because where
accident
you
more than they
stand,
get
yeah,
shot.
the pulling over somebody, that's like the most dangerous thing just because of traffic.
You're
you know
right. You're going to get run into by who knows. And now it's even worse with, when I first started in law enforcement, people weren't text messaging and driving, but they are now.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
more dangerous now.
I
Um,
saw somebody. They had the phone like this, and they were eating. There's not holding on anything. And I'm
Right.
like, how are you even driving?
Right.
What's going on? What are you?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, the cars we drive are a lot safer for the person in the car, but if they run into a pedestrian, the
Right, they're screwed.
pedestrian's
Right,
screwed.
yeah.
So no, I always understood that, listen, if I die at work today, that my wife and family are going to be taken care of. They have a massive, if a law enforcement officer dies, um, his or her children lose a mom and a dad, but they gain thousands of stepmoms and stepdads. And my wife had a huge support system of family and friends. So I always understood that, hey, if I die, it's going to be, really difficult on my family, but they're going to be financially okay because we had the right insurance. My family's going to have a massive support system from both the law enforcement community, the Salvation Army community, and my
Right,
wife's
right.
inner circle of friends. So I never thought, St. Michael is going to protect me today.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I never,
exactly.
never thought that.
It never entered your mind. Yeah,
No, I'd never thought
I just
that.
find that interesting as a bit of trivia. Okay, so see, let's move on from there. Let's talk about YouTube now. YouTube was made, well, goodness gracious, quite some time ago now.
Yeah.
But when did it kind of appear on your radar as did you, uh, not as just a entertainment or what have you? How did you first interact with YouTube, if you can even recall that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. Not that long ago, really, my original plan is when I really started to understand this is the reason why I do not believe Jesus, resurrected from the dead. When I started to get a foundation of like kind of disbelief, like, no, I think Christianity is actually not true. I actually didn't listen to atheists that much. I would listen to Catholic apologists mostly, and then research their arguments to see if they were verifiable or not. And sometimes I thought, okay, that's a pretty good argument. And a lot of times I thought, well, you're not giving the whole story here. You're just giving part of the story. So I did read J. Warner Wallace's book. My wife, who's a Christian, gave me that book, and because it was written by a former cop, yada yada. It seemed like a good fit. So she gave me that book, and I read it. When I read it, I knew quite a bit more, but not as much as I know now. I was still in this process of learning. That process never stops. You're always learning more, about the New Testament, the Old Testament. I mean, the learning, to me, it's fascinating. At any rate, I read the book and I thought there were some major problems in the book. And so my original plan was to write a book refuting J. Warner Wallace's book, or at least some of the parts of the book that he wrote that I really strongly disagreed with. Um, you know,
Yeah,
I
that'd be a worthy project, I think, because
yeah, and I mean, maybe I'm a little bit lazy though, and a little bit ADD. Like, okay, so I started writing a book, and I found out, okay, I can write a police report because that's just technical writing. You're just writing, this person told me this. It's not creative. It's not creative. I guess there's a large segment of the community that would say, no, you're absolutely wrong like that. Police reports are creative, but that would be a
yeah.
uh, I just sucked at writing, and so YouTube was something that I felt more comfortable doing, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you came out of the gate with going after Warner Wallace because he's using his prestige of he did do detective work, he did
Yeah.
investigate big stuff, so he's actually done stuff. But then when it comes to applying that methodology, I find a lot of similarities between him and the journalist guy. Oh, what's his face? I want to say Strobel. That might not be it. But the form.
Lee Strobel, I believe, was a journalist dude.
Yeah, okay, that might be it then.
Yeah.
But I was like, my brain was going there. Like, I don't know, but he, and so he's using his investigative journalism to look into and see if this is true, and so you have this guy. I'm going to use my detective skills on this, and it's like,
Yeah.
are you though? Because it doesn't seem to me like you are. I can only point out the logical fallacies. I can't talk about the police
Right.
work. if this was, if you had a weird crime, you're called to the scene of the crime, but it wouldn't be a crime because they legally killed Jesus. So you're gonna have to pretend now this is a crime. Somebody's been crucified. You know, and the body has gone missing. So what? How would you begin an investigation like that? I mean, you'd have other people involved. You'd rope it off the area. You'd take pictures. Gather what you'd talk to all the people there. I mean, there'd be a lot involved, I would imagine, in a case where somebody had been known to have been crucified and then their body went missing.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything parallel that you ever went into that even I'm sure people have been murdered and their body has gone missing. Um, but what the amount of paperwork and documentation that would go into that, there doesn't I don't think that that's something that they would have done in the ancient past at all. So
Yeah.
to, how can you hope to put those two worlds together? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the job of a historian and the job of a police detective do have some similarities in that you
Yeah.
got these two professions trying to figure out what happened in the past, right?
Right, yeah. You're
But
more
they're very
immediate, because it's happened maybe yesterday, maybe a week ago, but you're more immediate to the scene than the historian
usually more
is.
immediate. Now with J. Warner Wallace's thing, he wasn't necessarily immediate to the scene. Some of the murder cases that he was investigating, would have been 10, 15, 20, or even 30 years old. Now
Right.
that's nowhere near 2,000 years old. So
Yeah.
obviously, when all your witnesses die, well, you can't
Yeah.
talk to them. But to kind of directly, if you were investigating the crucifixion of Jesus and the missing body, I mean, the first person that I would talk to, would be Mary Magdalene because she's referenced in every single gospel as having been there, but she never wrote any statement.
Hmm. You
So
never interview. There's no interview of her.
there's no report of what her statement is. There's just so this would be what a detective would call a lead.
Mm.
Like John's gospel depicts Mary Magdalene as being there and watching Jesus die. So that is not a statement from Mary Magdalene. It's a lead for the detective who they got to go talk to. We got to go talk to Mary Magdalene and just ask her, hey, were you there? What did you see? And then, after we get this big, broad statement from her, we might start asking real detailed things. And then she's at the scene of the empty tomb as well. So it's okay, tell us about the empty tomb. And we would get her statement from her. It is not okay to read, Matthew's gospel and say, oh, she was there and there was these two guys there and, all this stuff happened. That's hearsay
Yeah.
evidence.
Nobody talked to the guards either.
All of those people, the guards would be important. When did you
Yeah.
show up? I mean, it sounds like from Matthew's gospel that there was a delay. Joseph of Arimathea buries Jesus in the tomb. And, I mean, did he even do that? I mean, we would investigate
There was,
that.
he wasn't interviewed either.
Not interviewed. No statement from Joseph of Arimathea. So now, because of the 2,000 years, the only evidence we really have are the gospels, the epistles of Paul. And when you really start to look at this thing now, like Paul is a little bit different though, because he does write these letters. And in his letter, he does write that Jesus appeared to him. Now it's very
Hmm.
vague, but I would look at Paul's letter as maybe a letter from somebody who's directly saying, Jesus appeared to me. And that would be an interesting statement. That would be a witness, at least having written that an interrogatory that, hey, Jesus appeared to me. Very different than Mary Magdalene, who's alleged to have been there, but she didn't write, or we have no record of what her statement was.
Yeah, because Paul wasn't even there any of these events, so it's just like who
Right. It's
cares?
more of a
Whatever.
dream thing.
If somebody came, to the police department and said, "Hey, look, I'm getting visions from a ghost," I suppose you'd write that down, but there's really nothing to investigate there, is there? It's you relegate them to the psychologist or something. There's not much for you to do with that, right?
Yeah, well, there's no crime involved unless the ghost told them that, there was a murder victim's body somewhere. We'd go look for the
Yeah,
body. I mean, we would, we would go
yeah.
looking for it. Um, but yeah, it'd have to be saying a ghost appeared to me. Well, yeah, but the Jesus's resurrection would actually not be a law enforcement matter. It's a
Yeah.
theological matter.
Now, if
However,
somebody, if we were to drag that analogy into the present day to use police work, like we're going to pretend that something like this happened today,
yeah,
so we have evidence that somebody was crucified. We know that they were dead, and we know that the body went missing, and then we go from there to explore it, and you have somebody come in a few years into the investigation and say, "Oh yeah, the dead guy spoke to me." I guess you would write down what he had to say, but but what it's like, what value would that really have in the investigation? Because I know that sometimes police have worked with psychics and paranormal, and it seems that every time that they've done that, it's been a big giant waste of time and money because
yeah.
there's no such thing as those powers. It's just people making up stuff. uh, uh, I don't know, did your police unit ever involve paranormal investigators at all, or was that
No, the only
okay?
time
That's
that
good.
yeah, no. The only time we got even close to that was we did use an FBI profiler for a murder case. Now, I was not a homicide investigator, but we were a small unit. So if we were investigating a murder, you kind of knew what was going on, but I was never directly really involved in any of that. But it was a whodunit murder, and trying to figure out potential suspects, and we're investigating the victim. You investigate the victim if you have no idea who the killer was, to see if there might be developed some leads in who the killer was. So the FBI profiler had all of the victim's associates fill out a questionnaire form, and then he evaluated those questionnaire forms and suspected that a college professor had been involved in the murder, and that turned out to be 100% wrong. um,
Hmm.
Completely wrong, because that case was solved. The suspect was convicted. And yeah, so that was my only time where somebody was kind of doing some sort of magic, to try and figure
Yeah,
it out.
yeah,
And that
like,
person came out to
because
be
there
wrong.
there is a science to profiling, but maybe
There
they
is. It's not
applied
an
it
exact
wrong.
one, though.
It's not. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it might get you. It's like, well, generally it's this, generally it's that. It's going to be a male between the ages of whatever and all this. You can get that just pure from stats alone. You can
Yeah.
see that what the likelihood of where they're going to fall into. But it's a limited system. It's not somebody saying, yeah, a ghost appeared, or spirit, or God appeared to me. And
Yeah.
I mean, these are just things, like you said, that these wouldn't th- attempting to investigate something where people are claiming that, oh, and we saw by the way, not only did the body disappear, but the guy's actually alive now. Like, that, now it's not a murder anymore. Now it's I don't even know what it is now. It's a mistaken death. Did somebody actually die now? There's
Yeah.
all sorts of new questions, like,
Right.
you had video of them dying, you had ample evidence of them dying, whatever evidence you want of them dying. And then you had the evidence of them in a tomb, and then you have the evidence that they went missing. But then you have people that are saying, "Oh no, I saw them, I talked to them,"
Yeah.
and all you could do, the best you could do, would be to write down their statements, unless you actually were able to see the person yourself. You wouldn't be able to confirm if that person was alive just based on their statements, right?
Yeah, I mean, the only real law enforcement matter might be if you had a missing body, that could potentially be a law enforcement matter. Like, hey, where's this body at? Did somebody steal it? That could be a
Yeah.
crime attached to that. And then the magnitude of the particular case too. Sometimes the police do actually get involved in investigating something that's not criminal, but it's got such magnitude that we sort of have a responsibility. So I would think that claims of Jesus's resurrection, modern day, would rise to that level. Like, hey, we're gonna have to look into this. So
Yeah.
no, it would be a matter of okay, we have a missing body, so it'd be interviewing the people that buried the body, interviewing the people that discovered that the body was missing, and then interviewing the people that saw Jesus alive after his crucifixion. It's not rocket science, actually. Police work is not rocket science. Reasonably intelligent and well trained and experienced people can totally do this job. There's no magic to it. And then, you would try and look for Jesus and ultimately interview him too. Hey, what's the deal here? All these people
Yeah, yeah.
saying
What
he died
happened?
and
We
now
want to
you're
test
alive.
his DNA. We want, I mean, his blood type. We do all sorts of tests on this guy because maybe he is an identical twin or something. I mean,
Yeah,
I mean, but
we would be interested in that.
yeah, and then but there'd actually be something to investigate, and that's kind of the problem is all of this stuff. We don't have any of that. We don't, we're imagining this scenario, and none of that is, if you had all of that, and if you had the DNA prior of Jesus, you saw that this guy died yourself, you're there. Like I said, we have ample evidence. You know he's dead. You checked him yourself. You saw him go into the morgue. You saw that there was no body in the morgue. You saw Jesus. You were able to test him and go, well, he is, the DNA matches. Well, at best you have a bizarre mystery, but could you really proclaim that it's supernatural? I don't know that we could. We'd say this is weird. Let's do more investigation. We'd want more science done on it. We couldn't just toss up our hands and go, "Oh, I guess it's God. It's really God because he's saying he's God." I mean that it's just not. It doesn't seem. I don't know when we would get to the point where we go, "Okay, yeah, it's God." But, in my own mind, but is there something that, for you, that if you had access to all this data where you'd go, okay, that's enough, it's probably God? Or is it always like you would always want more? Because people sometimes accuse me, it's like, well, even if it all was here, you would never accept it. And I'm like, I don't know. I think that there'd be something, there'd be a line that, you know that would be there, that would be like, well, might as well be God then. It's close enough to God that I can't
Yeah,
tell the difference at any rate.
sure.
So, is there something like that for you, or do you know, is that too nebulous of
Yeah,
a thought
well,
experiment? Or
a couple of interesting points. I think that most Christian apologists would immediately say, well, we do actually have the things that I'm describing that a law enforcement officer would do to investigate the resurrection of Christ. We already have that. That's done. He says he's God in John's gospel. We have all that.
yeah,
Um, and this is one of the main differences from a historian's perspective and a police officer's perspective. A police officer cannot bring it. We are used to proving things beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 jurors, and the defense team is going to rebut everything that we say. That's our standard of evidence. It's very high standard. I don't think that a Christian apologist could prove this in a courtroom setting beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 jurors. They just couldn't do that after skeptical communities refuted their claims. But I do believe this, though, for me personally, if I believe the gospel stories were reasonably accurate, then I would be a Christian. I would, but I don't believe they're reasonably accurate. I think they're legendary enhancements of a first century rabbi who, pushed things too far and got crucified in the most brutal of fashion. And whether all the sayings of Jesus are actually the saying of Jesus, or they're the sayings of Matthew putting the sayings of Jesus in his mouth,
who
I really
knows? I
think they're
mean,
more the
yeah.
sayings of Matthew than they are of Jesus. But ultimately, I don't think the Gospels are reliable at all. I think they're actually very poor evidence, and that's one of the reasons I make my videos. And then I think the people who are telling us that they're good evidence, they're either mistaken or outright dishonest, because when you start looking at their individual arguments, and I'm using J. Warner Wallace in my videos as a sample, he's only giving you part of the information. I have 2 videos now, and both of them, I challenge him to make public statements as to why he puts stuff in his book and why he says things that are, in my opinion, demonstrably false.
Yeah, it's interesting. I went, in preparation for this, I went to look at one of the videos, and I was reading through the comments because those are always enjoyable. I used to get some jaded comments. Now all the Christians avoid me for some reason. I don't know why, but
Yeah. I mean, listen, Christians are fun. Occasionally, I look at the Christians are the ones I like to engage with.
yeah, right, yeah,
You know,
exactly.
people disagree
Eventually,
with
they give
me.
up. They run away because you're given, you're and it's like you're not it's like look, you're trying to make a point that he's not applying the skill of detective work at all to any of this. So that point right there is illegitimate. So that whole thing is just an appeal to authority that's not even being utilized. He's not actually using any detective skill at all on any of this because it's impossible to do, right? I mean, you can't detect anything with this stuff. It's too old. It's too far removed from the event to do any. I mean, I
Well,
guess
yeah,
is that am I going too far there? Push back on me here because
yeah, I'm going to
it's
push back
like
on you a little bit here. Look, and I put this in my last video. I don't consider the Gospels or Paul's epistles to be good, credible, believable evidence at all, but it is evidence. I'm not saying it's not evidence. So, a police officer, this happens all the time in police work. There's, as a sexual assault investigator and a crimes against children investigator, I actually dealt with this maybe more than average. You have the allegations of a very serious crime, and it's just horribly unfortunate, but you can't prove that crime actually occurred to 12 independent, unbiased jurors after a defense team, launches a defense. And you're stuck with, I don't have enough evidence to prove this.
mm,
And I dealt with that a lot, and it's unsettling, but it's also reality. So the evidence that we do have evidence of Jesus's resurrection. I don't think it rises to the level of the quality that you would need to say, hey, this person,
yeah,
resurrected from biological death back to biological life or divine life. I
yeah,
don't think it reaches that threshold of quality that you need. And I don't think you need it. I think if I reasonably believe that the Gospels were probably more true than not true, I'd be a Christian. But I
right,
don't have any confidence that the Gospels are true, and I have great confidence they're just these stories with just about a real person with an enormous amount of legendary enhancements.
yeah,
And I know that, apologists say, oh, no, it can't possibly be a legend because nobody
yeah.
will
No, that
die
doesn't
for a
happen.
lie and all of this.
Right.
And all
Yeah.
of it's very refutable. It's just,
Um. Yeah, and then Warner also had three things that are the only three reasons people murder, and I found that to be incorrect.
mm,
Of course, mental illness would be the fourth, but it is this an actual list of the only reasons why people kill that he's providing, or is that just something he's come up with? Or because he says this with such authority, like it's really true, like
right.
this is the only reason why people ever murder.
Yeah.
Is that his own creation, or is there anything to that?
There's no real law enforcement training specifically on that, but every police detective knows that if you're going to prove murder, you have to be able to also prove malice aforethought. So, mental illness, sometimes a person with a serious mental illness or undergoing a really serious mental episode could kill another human being, murder another human being, but that murder is not going to be something they can be convicted of because of their mental illness. But you have to be able to prove motive. Um, but there's no law enforcement training that says motive always falls under these three things. To me, this is not an important enough issue
Okay, all right.
to really deal with. I think there's more.
I find the littlest things to be like, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I understand that. My point in putting that in the video was he says power, sex, and money.
Yeah.
Well, there's
I'm like,
evidence
well,
that the apostles were indeed making money off of the
yeah,
gospel,
and
and they were gaining
certainly,
power,
and or even just fame and prestige. I mean, just
prestige. Absolutely.
you if you've been a nothing guy, just a fisherman, and now people are listening to what I have to say. I mean, that's way cooler than what I was doing. That's enough, you know. And that's assuming that they were real people. There's a lot of I don't even call it evidence because it's just so far removed. But that's me. I'm more jaded on it.
I would like to add into, as far as the evidence in the New Testament, not only did the apostles gain a way of making a living that didn't involve the labor of fishing, but they had wanted power before Jesus's crucifixion. They argued
Yeah,
about
they were
it.
fighting amongst each other who's the best and all
Right.
that. Yeah, I mean, the points that you're making are basically he's not providing us the full story.
Right.
He's taking parts out of it and enhancing it to make it seem more viable. Where you're looking at it and you're saying you're not being critical on like you should be as a detective.
Yeah.
You're doing this from a desire to make it seem true. Which
Yeah.
if
Oh,
it is
totally biased.
yeah, if it is true, fine, great, wonderful.
Right.
Maybe it's true. That's where we're both. I mean, you and I think, skeptical-minded people, we want the truth. So
Right.
hopefully everybody does, but goodness knows. Yeah, there were some comments I wanted to read off because you had some constructive criticisms as well as the typical, just whatever nonsense that I saw reading through the comments.
Mhm.
It's like you got the one side, well, these got how the gospels were written, not by the original authors, yada yada. It's like, yeah, but you're coming, more of a general approach that many people do believe that they were written by the people that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's what a lot of people probably believe that.
Yeah.
So the more technical stuff, I think it's okay to miss out because you're pointing out that he's missing this and that point, and you're not really saying that doesn't mean that there is no God or that Jesus isn't it. It just means he sucks at his presentation. That's it. That should be the conclusion after watching your videos, is that this guy's argument needs work, and you're actually trying to get him to realize that and try to get people to realize we need a decent argument. Why are we settling for this broken argument
Yeah.
when we shouldn't? We should expect far more. um I did a dive into whether or not there was an earthquake during Jesus's death.
Uh-huh.
And well, we don't know. Maybe there was some sort of quake at some point in that region around that time, but the evidence is barely there for it.
Yeah.
And the Christians and also news outlets were just running with the story like they had tons of evidence, but they didn't.
Yeah.
They weren't.
Well,
They
they
weren't.
found Noah's Ark, or
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just.
yeah. They didn't. Yeah, they didn't look into it. They didn't actually
Yeah.
investigate it, and so I guess this is something because I always bring it up for myself and others. Is we also hold ideas in our heads that we think are true, and so how do we make sure that I'm not personally
Yeah.
holding some belief that I'm unwilling to challenge because I value it so greatly that I can't possibly be wrong about it.
Yeah.
Uh, so is there some sort of thought process you have about that conundrum of you
Yeah.
know uh, I believe this is true, and but I'm willing to challenge it. Is there something I'm not willing to challenge? I don't know. How do
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Like, how do I know I'm not the guy overwhelmed by cognitive dissonance or confirmation bias? Like, I'm actually the one that's should be a believer, but because my own dislike for it, I don't want to be a believer. It's a great question. And I think you just have to be aware that no matter who you are, a person of faith, a person of no faith, we are all biased to our personal opinions. If we have a belief system, it's hard for us to change that belief system. You can do it over time, but you have to be aware of that I try to be aware that I am a biased person, that I have made up my mind that this is not true. And if I come across some evidence that, wow, that's evidence in favor of it, that I will have a tendency to shut that evidence down and not pay attention to it. So that's the first thing I think you have to admit to yourself is that if you're a skeptic, you're biased against Christianity being true. And if you're a Christian, you're biased in favor of it being true. And so I think Mike Lacona does a pretty good job. He's a Christian, but he does bring up arguments. Even Sean McDowell will bring up atheist arguments, and he doesn't sugarcoat them, you know. And so I kind of have a little bit of respect for that. He's not dumbing them down. But I abandon arguments sometimes. I, have arguments that I'm going to put in a video. And as I'm researching that to make sure I can really defend that argument, I go, hey, I really can't defend this. I need to abandon this. And I think there are some facts, some depictions in the New Testament that the Christians do have somewhat of an argument. I'm going to put out a video on pretty soon. I'm working on it now about how the apostles, they're demonstrated or depicted as these guys who are suffering, getting beaten up, thrown in prison, ultimately martyred for their faith, and they refuse to recant their faith. Well, there's a whole lot of evidence that needs to be presented.
Yeah, Apologia has covered this to some extent, where he talked about that there really isn't any evidence that any of them had ever had a situation where they were allowed to recant, because the classical defense had been, oh, they've all been martyred for their belief, and the idea there is, well, that they had a opportunity to say that it was all made up, but actually none of them ever had that opportunity to say that it was made up. They were killed for various different reasons, and they might have been killed for their belief at some point, but it doesn't appear to be that they ever had this opportunity to drop the act, as it were, if it was an act. And but I think the whole thing's kind of a straw man anyways, because it's like, I'm not claiming that the disciples made it up. I have a completely different claim that I'll make that's really hard to defend, which is the disciples are made up. That's an even harder one.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a bad thing too, because this is a much more complicated argument. But were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John even in a position to have talked to any of the disciples? But on the Christian's point of view, I do think that proclaiming a risen Jesus would have been dangerous, whether they were martyred or not. It would have been totally against
the risk. Yeah, it would have gone against grain.
Yeah, it's kind of like you said this a little earlier. One of the things I kind of wanted to bring up that didn't come up here is Colin Kaepernick, and how words get put in his mouth that, he's an offense to police officers, that he's an offense to military personnel. Do you know who Colin Kaepernick is?
No, I'm not familiar.
He's the first football player that started taking a knee during the national anthem before football games.
Oh, okay.
He's the first guy that did that. And I was never offended by that. I don't
even know what that means. Like, why are you doing? I guess he's protesting something, or
racial discrimination and police brutality against the African American community, and the kind of the killing of unarmed African American people. He was the first person that kind of got that protest started. You might not be too familiar with it, but because I'm in law enforcement, I'm very familiar with it. I did not like having people put in my mouth that I was offended by his protest. One of the things that I swore when I joined the California Army National Guard in law enforcement is I defend the Constitution. And I thought his protest was very appropriate. It was peaceful. It was creative. And it got a lot of value out of it. And I'm like, what's the matter with that? If I wanted to protest something, I'm protesting Christianity. Why is it okay for me to do that? It's not okay for him.
Yeah. If they want to make some rule that you're not allowed to do that, that's a whole different matter. But they can't. I guess they can't. Well, I don't know. I suppose if they tried to make a rule that you're not allowed to do certain things at football games, they might get sued. And
maybe a team rule. I think U.S. Soccer, who I follow very closely, has a team rule. No, you got to stand for the national anthem, or you're violating our policy.
Yeah, so you just don't join that team or whatever. It kind of sorts itself out that way.
I guess the point I wanted to bring it around, though, is Colin Kaepernick was taking this big risk by doing that. He's going to become a pariah by doing that, but he did it anyway. So I think that does apply to the apostles of Jesus, that I think these guys, after Jesus' crucifixion, probably took a little time out. Maybe they went back to Galilee, but they did start talking about the resurrection, or none of these stories would have ever gotten written down. And that
Yeah.
would have been potentially risk taking for them to do that, with the powerful Jewish community. I don't think the Romans would have cared.
Yeah, probably the Romans wouldn't,
No,
yeah,
but
the
they cared
local
about
community would have
Jesus, so
cared. Yeah, yeah.
it was risky
Especially,
for him.
oh yeah, yeah. There's some risk entailed. I think, of course, there, with any cult or religion that you're starting, you're gonna face that, and actually that
Yeah,
oddly enough, reversely motivates people to do it even more. Like the more
yeah,
resistant. That's why the Mormon Church took off like a banshee. Is they had insane, resistance from everyone at
yeah.
all times. There was like never a time they didn't have resistance against
Right.
the
Almost
church.
motivates you in a
And
way.
that actually, yeah, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
I must be right because everyone, is telling me I'm wrong. It's like
Right.
so weird.
Now I'm really going
Uh,
to fight for this.
yeah. Now, oh, I'll show you. It's like as you were saying, it's like how do I make sure that I'm not being biased? I wanted to ask: is the fact that people are putting out repeatedly weak or bad arguments, should we use that as any indication on the value claim being made? Because I would say no. But what would you think about that? Like, well, all these people keep putting out these really bad arguments, weak arguments, and not being critical of the content.
Yeah.
Is that an indication that there's some that the claim underlying it is not true, or is that just an artifact that we have to ignore?
Yeah. So how would I look at this? I would look at it. What troubles me is they're not giving out all of the argument. I think there's more information there that needs to be presented for people to make a decision based on all the information, as opposed to what some apologists are willing to talk about. And I think J. Warner Wallace is very guilty of this, that he gives out only the information that supports his claim of a risen Jesus and, the truthfulness of Christianity, and his arguments, ignore evidence that's right there in the New Testament itself. So he lacks credibility as far as I'm concerned. And other apologists, I became a Christian not because I researched the Gospels or the Bible. I became a Christian because people told me it was true. And I think those people who were telling me that it was true were good, decent people, and they probably believed it themselves. I don't think all of them believed it themselves, but it was the culture of the Salvation Army that you would pretend you believed it. So the ones that believed it were simply mistaken. They weren't dishonest, but I became a Christian because people told me it was true. And that is now, I realize, hey, people are saying this is true. No, their arguments are not actually that good. And so, it's,
Yeah,
I wouldn't
yeah,
believe people.
yeah. Anyone could say anything is true, and I think that because we're social creatures, if enough people say that something is true, we're likely to think that it is true.
Yeah, that was my
And
situation.
yeah, so it's just like, oh, okay, I've heard about this before, and yeah, I mean, they're doing good stuff, and nothing I can object to, and
Right.
sure, why not? I mean, why wouldn't it be true? Why couldn't it be true? And you don't really think about it until you pause, and then you do think about it. Uh, uh, I've been going for a bit, but there's so much more I want to explore. Pick your
Sure.
brain on. Like did you mentioned you have a family during this time. So did you find that you have to now uh, deprogram your kids or your spouse or whatever? What was was
Yeah.
there some falling out? I don't know if you want to get into any of that personal stuff,
Yeah,
but
no, that's a good, this is the,
like you
so,
taught your kids that this was true, and now you realize it's not. Now you have to go and tell them.
well, yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so I want to make this point too. I never taught my kids that this was true.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I brought my kids to church, and
Let them
I know that
decide.
because
Yeah.
I brought them to church. There were people saying it was church, but I never told my kids it was true. I've
Ah,
never done that because I was skeptical. And I'm
right.
not going to tell my kids that, hey, Jesus rose from the dead to was crucified for your sins if I was if I believed that, I would have taught that to my kids, but I was skeptical, so I never
Did you
did.
did you share that you were skeptical with them on the flip side and say, "Hey, look, I don't believe this stuff."
No, you know,
Yeah.
I'm dealing this with my grandchildren right now. Okay, so my
Okay.
wife is a charismatic Christian. I once referenced her as a Pentecostal Christian, and she did not appreciate that at all.
Yeah, because Pentecostal very different than
Yeah,
Salvation
I
Army.
really
Very,
misspoke.
very different. Very
I
different.
really misspoke. I really did. I kind of messed that up. And she very much straightened me out. So,
Evangelistic is probably the word you were
yeah,
going for there.
my
Yeah.
wife is a deep believing Christian woman.
Mm.
And she totally knows where I'm at. She kind of prays that the Holy Spirit will influence me.
Yeah.
Um, I don't have any desire to deconvert my wife. I would
Mm.
even, you know, if somebody told me that I should, I would even be offended by that. My
Yeah,
wife,
I don't know that we can do that really. I mean, but
I
I
wouldn't
mean,
have. I
yeah,
have
it's
no
like,
interest in that. You
yeah.
know, she does, and I may. This makes sense. She does have interest in me becoming a Christian and a believer in Jesus, but that
Right.
makes sense to me because she feels that hell and heaven are real things.
Right.
Um, but we have mutual respect for one another. You know, this is something. It's a big deal, and I'm not saying it makes my marriage better.
Yeah.
But it's something that we have to navigate. That life doesn't
Right.
always work out perfectly, and so. But my daughter is, I think, a Christian. I don't talk to my kid. I think my son is kind of an atheist. He's said he's an atheist. I don't talk to him really about that. And I don't talk about my grandchildren do mention Jesus because they go to a church. And I really feel it is not my business to be telling my grandchildren what they should or should not believe. That's their
That's
mom
their
and
parents.
dad's business.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
My job as a pop, that's my grandpa nickname, is to, you know, have fun with them. I know how to go to the beach and have a good time, so that's what I do with my grandkids. And you know, I just took
Yeah.
them to the La Brea tar pits, and I take them places.
Yeah, I find that I think it's difficult to deal with your family on these matters because they are so near and dear to us in our hearts,
Yeah,
in our feelings, and our emotions. It's far easier to deal with a friendly person or a stranger and debate them on it.
yeah,
I mean, I've had encounters with certain people that I'm very familiar with. That it's like the way that I talk to them is very different than the way I talk to people online. I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure about that. And I'm not like actively going after their belief like I would if I was online because
yeah,
it's like there's this relationship there that I don't want to, I don't want to dent that at all. And I just sadly had a falling out with somebody because they went like the reverse way where I always struggle with the balance of emotion and logic, and I forget that they have to work together
yeah,
sometimes, and that reason and logic has to temper our emotion, but we have to have emotion as well. We have to recognize that that's a vital component of our relationships, especially if somebody's trying to teach you something. If you're going at them and you're hurting them emotionally, and you don't recognize that, then if you go, well, I don't care that I'm hurting your feelings, that's going to end the relationship, and then you're not going to be able to teach them.
right,
And they I think they forgot that, or whatever. I don't know. It's hard to say. All I know is how I feel about it. In the end.
sure,
So all I can do is change myself and be like, hey, I'm gonna try to remember that lesson and not do that to other people. And that I think that's what, broadly speaking, we're trying to do with our YouTube stuff in a way is say, hey, look, maybe the story is true, but this guy, he's not giving you the full story. We could do better than that. Let's do better than that.
yeah,
Expect more, demand more, require more from these people that are telling you that it's true, and don't just believe it because somebody says it. Don't believe you. It's just because you said it. Don't believe me. Be skeptical. How about
right.
that? What does it mean to be skeptical? Because you have the word skeptic. I love that word. What does the word skeptic mean? And then I think we'll finish it there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I was trying to come up. I think it's probably a little corny, but
Oh.
yeah, I was trying to come up with, a YouTube channel name, and I wanted it somewhat related to my past law enforcement career and related to atheism. It was Sergeant Atheist for a while, but I thought that just sounds too kind of harsh and in your face a little bit. I don't know. I just came up with Sergeant Skeptic. I know Alex O'Connor just went from, Cosmic Skeptic, but now I think his thing is Within Reason, which is much better than Cosmic Skeptic, but I'm still back in the day. So it's just what I came up with,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, all the artwork and everything, it's all just me. I think Jay Warner Wallace has a professional video staff doing
Well,
his stuff.
probably, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
He's also a
He's got.
creative guy, though. He is a
Hey, yeah.
creative guy.
Hey,
He,
no,
he
no, no, no fault there. If you get rich off doing whatever, hey, look, it's whatever.
yeah.
I've
So
got
yeah,
my
it's just what
books
I
that I
came up
talk
with.
about. So
Yeah, it's just what I came up with. I wanted something that people could remember. I really struggled with the word sergeant because it's a French word. It's hard to spell. And I
yeah,
wanted
it
something
doesn't look
easier
right.
to
Yeah, it
spell.
doesn't look right. It's like that's not how it should be.
Yeah,
SAR.
right.
Like
Sargent.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it's like it doesn't make any sense. And of course,
Right.
there's
So I
like.
struggled with that. Like, that's too complicated of a
Of course,
word.
it's gonna be reduced to SS, and then you're gonna have to
Yeah,
deal
that's
with
another
that.
problem. Yeah, right. That's another problem. So
Don't have red in your background ever.
yeah.
Be
So
like
right,
SS,
right, right.
and like, you're like, oh no, no.
It's kind of funny because I put a little bit of effort into the background of my videos, right? So I people have probably figured out I'm frequently on the California coast in a motorhome, but I thought about having a nice, really nice bonfire in the
No,
background.
no, 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 no,
Don't
no,
do that,
no, 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 no,
man.
no, 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 no,
Don't do that.
no.
That's not going to be good.
Optics are could be like when they did
Right.
Biden had the speech and it was red, white, and blue, but we only
Yeah.
saw the
Well, I
red,
was
and it
thinking
just
of
was like,
all the comments from Christians. You better get
yeah,
used to that
you're,
fire, buddy.
yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, and then I did have a question from chat really briefly. I think the
Yeah.
answer is no, but the age of the earth, the age of the universe, was those things ever mentioned in the Salvation Army as part of their ideas, or was science just not spoken of? Would do you agree with the scientific ideas
Yeah.
of
So,
those things,
so
or?
this is kind of interesting for two reasons. First of all, the Salvation Army does not really have any concept of Christian apologetics.
Hmm.
They don't try to prove to people. Everybody in the Salvation Army is a believer, or at least a skeptical believer. There's no real arguing about whether the Gospels are, accurate history or not. They don't have that. They're a service.
Yeah.
They're a church, a Jesus believing church. They've already made that decision. It's not really a church for people who are having doubts or skepticism. And then they do service as well. Um, so there's no discussion on whether it's true. Everybody just kind of believes it is.
Yeah.
As far as
Yeah.
the age of the universe, this is kind of interesting because the very first thing I decided I want to know if this is true. Um, and I think about, well, what if I would have listened to a Catholic apologist first? It's not what I did first because I think the Catholics cover that with a better argument. But my very first research was on Genesis chapters 1 and 2, whether that was true. And it was the debate between Ken Ham and Bill Nye, the science guy. It's online. You can watch. That was the very first thing I watched. And I thought Bill Nye really has the better argument. And I sort
Yeah.
of over time came to believe Genesis is not true. That's not right. The story's wrong there. This is not how the universe came into existence. And so that was a notch down on my belief. So I wanted to explore that. And I was really listening to fundamentalists at that particular time. Young Earth creation that's the kind of the first avenue. And I decided the young Earth creationists were wrong. But I often wonder, what if I would have listened to Catholics because they think that whole
Yeah, they don't have a
argument,
real problem with
no, they don't have a problem with evolution at all.
yeah. Yeah.
And maybe I wouldn't have had the notch down. I would have
Mm,
been still neutral, like, oh, okay, it doesn't matter that Genesis is wrong
yeah.
because it's just some kind of epic poetry or whatever.
Right. I've
Um,
encountered flat earthers. Finally did talk to it came out I didn't know he was a flat earther.
uh-huh.
Otherwise I would have approached it differently. I was like, "Oh, flat earther. Like, it took me completely by surprise, you know,
Yeah.
and because I've seen them and heard them, but I've never interacted with one. So I mean, yeah, people believe in just wacky screwball things
Oh, they do.
because religion tells them,
Yeah.
essentially, and for no other reason. And maybe the current war, I wonder, how much the Holy Land plays a part in that. That if all these
Mm.
diverse people didn't think this one spot is holy,
Yeah.
they'd still have problems. I think they'd have different problems. It wouldn't be such a deal of who controls that one spot if it wasn't holy. You
Yeah.
know,
For
it's
so
like,
many,
who
three
cares? It's
different
not.
religions, it's,
Yeah, three different religions that want the same
yeah.
spot because they all think it's holy, and their God told them that it was their spot, and it's like,
Yeah.
dude, it's just a spot. It's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's just a piece. What if you drill down a hole? Like, when does the spot end? When you hit the magma? I mean, it's silly. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I suppose they'd have problems. They just have different problems. But I think that when you have religion, sometimes you can get into a unresolved problem. There's a guy on your in your comments I was interacting with who said, Jesus is truth, everything else is a lie. And I said, is computer true? And he's like, no. I'm like, well, what the fuck did you?
Yeah, right,
So,
right,
what?
right,
What the bleep were you?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
I can swear it's my own channel. What do I bleep in myself for? Whatever. I try to be PG, but yeah, I was like, what? How you like when you're that far gone from reality,
Right.
there's nothing I can do with that. It's like,
Yeah.
Jesus doesn't mention computers, so therefore computers can't be true. Or
Yeah.
fans or houses, or what else did Jesus not bring up? So
Yeah.
but there's more reasoned approaches, and I think that you're attempting a reasoned approach, and I think that it's of value. And even if this doesn't become a book, it's certainly a series worth checking into. And even when you're done with Wallace, I think you'll do more interesting takedowns,
Yeah, I
and
got more ideas than I do
yeah,
time to produce.
yeah, right, yeah. So I look forward to it, and we should all. And if you're not already subscribed to Sergeant Skeptic, or as I like to call him, SS, don't
Yeah, don't call me that.
don't call him
Call me Dana. If you're gonna,
that.
hey man, if you're not cool with the Sergeant Skeptic, just call me Dana, but don't call
Yeah.
me SS. Don't do
No.
it.
What about? Sorry.
Unless you're lettering. The first band I ever liked in my life was Kiss, and they had that.
Yeah, there you go, Kiss. There you
SS,
go.
yeah.
You just
So if I'm thinking SS, I'm thinking
cool
of band
cop.
Kiss, the first
But see,
band I ever liked.
if you'd stayed a Christian, you would have had Christian cop. You would have had Christ cop.
Yeah, who knows?
Pope
Sergeant
Pope
Christ, I guess. I don't know.
Pope police.
Yeah.
I like
If I'd
that.
have stayed a Christian, I wouldn't really be in this though,
Yeah,
because
you
I'm
probably
a
wouldn't. Yeah,
believer.
you
Well, maybe I
could
would
say.
be. Yeah.
But the Salvation Army doesn't do that sort of apologetic stuff,
No,
so you might.
I'll tell you this though. Probably if I
Yeah,
stayed a Christian, it is possible I would have did it because the opposite
it's
is true.
interesting, isn't it?
Some
To do
well,
this.
some Christian arguments I think are full of BS, but I do think sometimes atheists can be full of BS as well.
Yeah, well, never me.
And
I'm always right.
so I might, as a Christian, very much push back on what I consider to be bad
Oh
atheist
yeah, yeah,
arguments. So
absolutely. I push back
yeah,
on all the. That's all I care about is whether the argument is good or bad. I don't care who makes it or what it's for.
sure.
Uh, but yeah. So thank you so much for your time and energy in doing this. You're interesting. We've got a lot of background. There's still more things I'd love to know about and whatnot, but I don't want to keep you here all day. And check out your channel, a sub to him, like his stuff, comment on it, whatever you want to do with that. Is there anything? You talked about maybe you'll do a maybe book. Is there anything like that you perceive maybe in the future, or
Yeah.
projects that we can look forward to, or?
Yeah, no, nothing in if that was my first idea of kind of abandon that. The only thing that I'm doing is I do scripts, so maybe people have figured this out, and I keep all those, and maybe someday I collaborate with somebody who can actually write really well. But it's not a plan. My next two videos, I have another one of J. Warner Wallace depicts the apostles as these beaten up, smashed up, imprisoned dudes. and I'm going to be doing a video on why there's more information that you need to be aware of on that. And then I've always wanted to do a video on morality that, Frank Turek, I'm going to probably highlight him. He says, well, atheists shouldn't even have an opinion on morality because it's just their opinion.
Right.
And there's a lot to say on pushing back against Christian ideas about morality. And so that's probably going to be,
I read a thing, this whole lengthy book, Ethics in Law Enforcement,
uh-huh.
and fascinating how the different ethic systems that exist, and that you have to be aware of them to some degree, and how being aware of them in law enforcement is of use, because then you can understand to some degree human behavior and that.
Sure.
And so yeah, and I think DCT, Divine Command Theory, is the worst ethic of all. It is an appeal to authority that you can't confirm, and it's right no matter what. You can't say you can't question it. And the whole point of an ethic is set your value on X, and then you go after it. But if your value is X and you can't ever question it, I find that to be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, comparing law enforcement ethics, law enforcement ethics come from the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics. It comes from the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, the laws of the individual state that the police officer is working in, and then the laws of the federal government. That's where law enforcement ethics come from. God is not mentioned in any of that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that all of those things are perfect and divine,
Oh no,
and
yeah.
they're not. There's problems with all of them, but that is a vastly superior way of getting ethics than to read an ancient book and going, these are the ethics that we should be following. So that's going to be, I'm looking forward to doing a video on morality.
I certainly look forward to checking that out. Again, thank you for your time and energy to do this, and I personally would like to thank you for your service to the community as a
Oh,
police officer. It's a very dangerous thing to do, and glad that you did that, and glad that you made it out okay. And I'm very interested in your channel, and pretty somewhat interested in you as a person, uh, but not in a weird, creepy internet
you know,
way.
weird way.
Okay, anyways, all right. Better stop before I say something stupid. Oh, it's too
That's
late
all
for
right.
that. All right, thank you, and we're gonna hit the button. And until next time, be skeptical or something. Do you have an outro that you use?
Yeah, I tell people to be safe. That's a law enforcement thing. Cops are always telling you, hey, be safe, man. So that's just kind of my end all. But I do appreciate you having me on the channel. And yeah, so thanks a lot for your time.
Okay, I'm gonna hit the button, but don't go anywhere.
Sure.
And button. Button? Is that the button? Which is the button? Push the button, you idiot! That's the button. Okay, there it is.